the day war broke out, I was in the Great Australian Bight between Fremantle and Melbourne. And we got a signal saying war was declared. I think it was sometime in the afternoon, towards the dog watches, and then we darkened the ship, and the following day we went into Melbourne. At that time I was serving in a merchant ship. I was in the port line. And we went in, as I say, we went into Melbourne, where I reported to the Australian Navy office, and they said, yes, glad to have you, and I went down to HMAS Cerberus at the bottom of Port Phillip Bay, thinking I was going to be into the Royal Australian Navy. But the Royal Navy sent a signal out, any Naval Reserve people were to be sent home immediately, and not to hang around in Aussie. It was rather a pity, because I would like to have been in the Australian Navy. Had some lovely ships, but of course they had a hell of a pounding in the Pacific War. Be that as it may. I then came back to the Mediterranean and joined an armed merchant cruiser, HMS Voltaire, in the Mediterranean, doing contraband control stuff. I was a midshipman then, a young midshipman. I suppose I was 19, perhaps I just had, just 20 I think. I'd done 3 years as a cadet in the merchant service. And as I say, we're in the Mediterranean. We used to do contraband control. We were based in Malta, where I continued with my naval education, the Fleet Education Centre there. In the mornings, and lots of sport and things in the afternoon, sailing. I shared a RNSA 14-foot dinghy with a chap who used to do a lot of sailing. And in fact, on one patrol, I took the boat with me, hoisted it up on board Voltaire. We did our patrol somewhere over Greece, I think, and returned to Alexandria, where I very happily spent some time sailing in Alexandria Harbour in this boat. And actually, the commander was very keen on sailing, and whenever he wanted to go ashore, the captain, he used to pipe for me to come and rig the dinghy and sail him ashore. It was rather fun. So that was that.
And that went on for how long?
Well, then we were back in Malta, I remember, in about April. And I had a lovely girlfriend who was Italian, in the Italian Opera Company. And I'd arranged to meet her on Saturday, about midday, a Saturday, sometime middle of April, I've forgotten when. When the previous night we got a signal to leave and sail to Halifax, Nova Scotia. So we weighed and left Malta Harbour about midday, and I saw her on Customs House jetty, and I gave her a wave to goodbye. Anyway, there we are, and we went over to Canada, to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where we were doing, we were doing the North Atlantic convoy duty from Halifax. Meant to be the fast convoys. They weren't very fast, really, but they weren't the slow ones which came from Newfoundland. We used to take a convoy out to 15 degrees west, where we were met by the local destroyer flotilla who took over, and then back to Halifax.
This was still on Voltaire, was it?
Yes, still in Voltaire. And my promotion came through then, sometime in 1940, and we were doing these awful convoys. They really were terrible. In the winter, they were ghastly. Open bridges, you know, the snow coming in and all that sort of thing. They really were rather unpleasant. We used to go down to Bermuda for rest and recuperation Well, sometimes we were damn glad to get back to sea with no rest, and we certainly didn't recuperate. We had a wonderful time down there. And then we went down to the West Indies, where we didn't do very much. Then we went into the port of Spain, where we lay alongside HMS Malaya, who had been torpedoed. And then a German raider was loose somewhere in the Atlantic between Port of Spain and the African coast. So we were detailed to go and find her. And sadly for me, and for quite a lot of people, we did find her. In fact, I was off the watch on the morning of the 4th of April 1941, when we saw a couple of masts on the horizon, and we then went to action stations, and unfortunately they opened fire at their extreme range, which was about 18,000 yards. Our extreme range was about 14,000 yards, and just about when we got to within range of her, they started to hit. Of course, German gunnery was quite superb, as indeed Hood, the loss of the Hood proved, and a lot of other ships. Their range takers and their optical instruments for a range finder, they were absolutely marvellous, and their gunnery was superb. So anyway, by the time we got to within range of her, we were on fire, taking a certain amount of, well, a lot of punishment, and we were on fire and sinking. And personally, I didn't know it at the time, but I'd been wounded. I didn't really sort of feel anything. And it came time to abandon ship. And I remember vividly, one will always remember just something like that. Excuse me. When it came to abandon the ship, I climbed over the guardrail, thinking, Christ, what's going to happen now? And beside me was a stoker, I think he was, who'd been one of the supply parties. And I said, come on, it's time we left. We had no communication with the command. The order to abandon ship was undoubtedly given, but I was the only officer left on the foredeck, and I could see, we were going down. I thought, right, come on. So I said to this chap, you've got to jump for it. He wouldn't move. And they come on, get over the side, get in the water. He couldn't move. So I said, come on, we've got to go. They said, we've got about a minute. So I gave him a shove, and he went in the water, and I followed. And I realised why he wouldn't go, because the poor devil couldn't swim. So he drowned, before my very eyes, as they say, which was, something to one will remember, I think, forevermore.
That wasn't an unusual situation, though, was it?
No, it wasn't. Particularly with stokers, I think, and indeed seamen. Then in the Navy, there was no requirement when you joined up. You didn't have to learn to swim. In fact, you're quite right. There were so many sailors that couldn't swim, and so many drowned for that very reason. Well, to continue the sad story, the German ship called Thor, Raider E, which I'll come to later, drew near, and I could see somebody up in the top with a rifle, and I thought, I know, they're picking us off. But actually, the chap up there was keeping a watch for sharks, right, because it was just south of the Cape Verde Islands, and it was in the subtropics, in the warm water, thank God. And anyway, they were scrambling nets, and they lowered boats and picked the survivors, those of us who had survived. They picked us up, hauled us on board, and I can't speak too highly for the German Navy. They were absolutely superb. They looked after us, the wounded. We were all put on the mine rails. She'd done a lot of mine laying. She laid a lot of mines off the Cape of Good Hope. And mines were on rails, and they got rid of all the mines down there. And all the wounded were laid out there. And when you're wounded, for some reason, you want a lot of water. Well, with an influx of about 70 of us, they couldn't distill enough fresh water for themselves and us, and they gave us the water we required, and they rationed themselves, which I thought was good, jolly good stuff. And the two doctors on board worked tirelessly and patched us up. They were very good. Two of my chums died. One chap who was the gunnery control officer with me on watch. He was wounded in the leg and got gangrene, and they cut his leg off all the way up, you know, bit by bit, and unfortunately he died. And one of the midshipmen, badly wounded, and sadly he died. So really I was one of the youngest surviving officers, as a young sub-lieutenant.
And how did they get you back to Germany?
Well, having sunk us, we did not get any report out, but I think the Admiralty realised that you know, when we didn't arrive at where we were going to, over in Bathurst, I think it was, I was on my way back to do my sub-lieutenant's courses, which were delayed for 4 years. No, I think they had orders to return immediately to Germany, and they hot-footed it back, came up the Channel, through Straits of Dover on the 1st of May 1941, and I was actually in the sick bay then, and out of the scuttle I thought I saw what could have been the White Cliffs of Dover. The next thing I saw was Cuxhaven. Wow. We went ashore, and as I say in my little book, I hadn't got that. We were in tropical rig when we went into action, and I had my shirt cut off so they could get at my little wound. I had no clothes at all, well, a pair of shorts, and excuse me, the PMO, the doctor, who was actually an Austrian, I believe, from Vienna, kitted me up with some clothes, saw me over the side into with an ambulance waiting for some of us, and I turned and thanked him, and I offered my hand, which was taken. I said, "Thank you for looking after us." And unfortunately, the press were there, the Volkische Beobachter, which was the organ of the Nazi party, and they took a photograph of me and appeared in the paper, I think, you know, prisoner thanks his captors, which I didn't like particularly. Then on to the naval camp at Marlag, as it was then. They moved it a little about a year later. Troops camp, whopping great place. At least about a square mile at least, full of French poilus, and there was a little corner reserved for the British naval people, and there were very few naval prisoners then. There were the crews of 3 or 4 submarines, Seal, Shark, Undine, I think I might say, Spearfish, I've forgotten, and a few people who've been, one or two have been caught up in Dunkirk few of those. A few sort of people who'd done extraordinary things, like trying to float mines down the rivers. One survivor, one warrant officer, warrant tell survivor from the Glorious, and a few people like that. And us, there weren't very many there.
This would have been towards the end of 41, would it?
This was, well, May 41. May 41, yeah, when I went there. Then dribs and drabs came in, people from coastal forces who'd been captured, their MTBs had been sunk, one or two people like that. And that's really when, it was a funny place, sand Bostel. And it was very sandy, it was built on sand. It was a huge, great place with this little corner for naval prisoners. And fortunately, I got myself back in, you know, sort of overcome all the trauma, if you like. So I started to think about getting out of the place. Compound, change places with a Frenchman and go off on a working party and run away. And I used to manage to get into the French compound, pretending I was going to the cobbler or something like that. And there were 3 Royal Marines in the Marlag who were captured at Calais, I think they were. They'd been sent over to blow up the oil storage things and got left behind. Anyway, they were looking around for a way to get out, and they knew I was doing my activities. So one day in about September, I suppose, of 1941, they got hold of me and said, look here, we're thinking of digging a tunnel. Are you on? So I said, well, yes, I think it's probably better than going out on a working party or trying to do that and meeting a guard with a rifle at the ready. So we started the tunnel. In about October, just the 4 of us made the initial, dug the initial thing, what do you call it, the shaft, that's what I want, down about 6 feet from a hut, the hut nearest the wire, which was used as our mess hut. And at the end of the hut was a sort of night, if the hut had been occupied, of course it would have been a sort of night loo, if you like, latrine, night latrine. But as the hut wasn't used for habitation, only as a sort of mess hut, this was unused, this little cabinet, so we just cut the cut the lavatory pan out, as it were, lifted it off and went down 6 feet, and then started going horizontally. And we did that all the winter, and of course as soon as we got started we realized we'd have to have a lot more help. So, which we did, a lot of people volunteered. We used to do 3 or 4 hours. Yeah, which is very cold. And in April, following year, tunnel was ready, and off we went. 16 of us got out that night.
And is this the tunnel that's written about in the book, The Tunnellers of Sandborstel?
Yes, yes.
Bosun Crisp?
No, John Crisp, yes, he wrote that. Yes, not a very accurate book. Well, there we are. We won't go into that. Yes. Yeah, old Bo Crisp joined us. and Mike Moran, and various others. And anyway, the night of whatever it was in April, 42, 16 of us got out of that hole, and off we went. Unfortunately, I was going off with a Captain of Marines, Darby Curtis, and in the dark we missed each other, unfortunately. And I spent about, I suppose half an hour stumbling around just out of sight of the searchlights in a dip of the land. They were dung spreading there, which gave us a certain amount of cover. There were heaps of dung, gave us some cover. Anyway, I tried to find old Derby, but dark, of course. And we missed each other, so I decided I'd better go on alone, which I did. I made all the usual errors. I was so excited, having gone out, I started singing, of course, in English, naturally. And anyway, I got on eventually to the outskirts of Hamburg, where I got caught in an English air raid, which was rather frightening. I was terrified, actually. Anyway, I got over that, and I was stopped by a sort of home guard chap. I spoke in French, he spoke in German, and we didn't understand a word of each other. But he waved me on. I got into Hamburg, and I got to the terminus, the railway station. I got on the wrong train and went back to Harburg, which is 15 kilometers the other side of the river, which is a stupid thing to do. Got back, looked up the timetable and got the right time. Went into the nearest pub and had a couple of beers. Got the train out towards Lübeck, where the RAF had been the night before, and we weren't allowed in. On the Baltic, and all the merchant ships which I wanted to stow away in, of course, that was my idea, had been sent round to Rostock or somewhere else like that. So I tried to go on to Rostock, but unfortunately, just going back to the railway station, I was stopped by a policeman who asked for my papers. Well, we had very little information then as to what was going on outside. The man who had the code in the camp made an awful nonsense of it. He got it all wrong, and we got no information. I thought there'd be wouldn't be any sort of French people up there in the Baltic. I thought they'd all be well, obviously German, but people from say Denmark or people like that. So I said I was a Danish seaman going home to see my mother, and I produced those papers. And the policeman, obviously came from Flensburg or somewhere like that, spoke Danish and addressed me in Danish. When I answered in French, he thought it was a bit strange. So he pulled me in, there we are. And eventually along came some frightful Gestapo man with a Luger by that size, whopping great Luger. Took me off to prison. Stuffed me in a cell with a Russian. Hadn't got any windows or anything like that. But fortunately, the policeman had told the local Luftwaffe chap that he caught a British officer, and they came and got me out of these civil hands and took me to their base there, where I spent 4 or 5 days in the guardhouse, waiting for an escort back to the Marlag. And eventually the chap turned up, the petty officer. I remember trying to dodge him in the railway station at Hamburg, the sort of the buffet place. and I was just sneaking off. But unfortunately he saw me in the mirror. So grabbed me. Anyway, back to Marlag, where there we all were.
Were they
All 16 of them, yeah, all back. Well, 2 came back after me. 2 came back who were caught actually in Flensburg on the border.
How long had
Danish
you
border.
actually been out, John?
I'd been out 5 days. And I walked. We agreed that the thing would be to walk, if possible, for a couple of days so that we wouldn't get caught, and then do anything we liked, take trains or anything like that, which I started to do, as I told you, from Hamburg.
What was the escape preparations in the camp? I mean, you obviously got German money and...
Oh yes.
civilian
Well, we
clothes.
bribed the guards with cigarettes and coffee, and got cash out of them. I remember making my own maps. I think I've all forgotten how we got hold of maps. I suppose we got a map off one of the guards. And they were very venal. I mean, quite appreciative of a packet of Players cigarettes.
What about papers?
But then, well, we made them up, really.
So you weren't sure?
Well, we didn't really know. When I got to Colditz, of course, then people knew a damn sight more. But we just rather made them up. We knew that you had to have a pass to say you're a French volunteer worker or something like that, because that's what I started off by pretending to be. Because I didn't think there'd be any French volunteer workers up in the Baltic. Of course, I was wrong. There were thousands of them up there. And if I'd stuck to being a Frenchman, I'd probably got away with it. But there you are.
So you were back at Marlag.
So back we came to Marlag, yep.
And then what happened?
Well, then a gentleman by the name of Roosevelt, who was the security officer, he was a political chap, really, extraordinary fellow. He sometimes appeared in naval uniform with a single stripe. I think he was a sort of warrant officer. And sometimes in marine artillery uniform with breeches and boots. And he was, as I say, the security officer. We used to bait him unmercifully, really. Anyway, one day, a little later, he came into the camp on his bicycle, leant his bicycle up against the hut, went into the hut, and it was too much for me. I let his tyres down, which he caught me, and he said, "Ah, yes, well, you won't be doing that anymore." And with that, we were all told 6:30 following morning, we were off.
Was that the whole 16 of you?
The whole 16 of us. And there off we went to Hamburg, where we put on a train to Berlin. We arrived, remember it well, we arrived at the Anhalter Bahnhof in Berlin at about 10 o'clock at night. And nobody knew what the hell to do with us. I remember there must have been somebody in one of the still neutral embassies, or some woman, I remember passing by, asking the porter where her baggage was in an American voice, and I said, "Hello, good evening." And she was rather surprised to see 60 naval officers, some in some semblance of uniform. No, it was an amusing encounter. Anyway, we were taken off to the German Admiralty for the night, and I suppose we are the only people ever sort of slept the night or been into the enemy's Admiralty, which was really rather amusing. The following morning we were told to get ready, and we mucked about, I'm afraid, and we missed the train we should have got on the Tiergarten, the zoo station, where we spent an amusing couple of hours watching the trains going off to the east, full of, troop trains going off. Then we found ourselves in a train at a place called Lambsdorff in Silesia. thought jolly odd. It was a big other ranks camp, huge great place. Well, we were put in a little enclave by ourselves. Well, we soon got out of that and mingled and found out what was going on. We were there about 4 or 5 weeks, if my memory serves. Terrible place, really. And then we moved on and by train to Colditz. Well, that in itself is quite amusing because we arrived, 16 of us. 16 arrived, no, as you were, 15 arrived, because Billy Stevens didn't get off at Colditz, at the Colditz station. He went on, but he was nabbed a bit later. Of the 15, there were only 14 that originally started off, because a chap called Mike Harvey, a submariner, changed places with a chap, an RAF chap, as a matter of fact, in the Lambsdorff. So this chap, I think he's a flight sergeant, he came with us, calling himself Mike Harvey. And it wasn't until Mike Harvey got caught in Lambsdorff trying to get out that that particular game was up. So really, of 16 left Marlag, 15 arrived, and of which one was not who he said he was. And it would be there. Billy Stevens came back fairly quickly. He was caught at the next station, I think. So that got me to Colditz, really. That's a sort of saga. And then really, you sort of know the rest, really, of Colditz, because you've talked to various other people, and you've got all the.
When you the 16 that you went, or it was 16 eventually that you got to Colditz with.
Yeah, 16 bodies. Well, 15 bodies, 16 when Billy.
Do you remember who they were?
Yes.
So many people can't.
Absolutely. Oh yes, yes, indeed. Well, we had 2 engine room artificers who joined the tunnel. Brilliant people. They were, of course, to use an army expression, non-commissioned officers. They were senior rates in the Navy. They were engine room artificers. They were fairly senior chaps. They're both submariners. Lister and Hammond are their names. Well, when they started to understand what the hell was going on in Colditz, there were all these escape things going on. It was decided, as they were submariners, if possible, we can, or the escape committee, if you like, could do what they could to get them out. Mike Harvey hadn't been recaught by then, or perhaps he had, I don't know. And anyway, if he had, he was in the cells, no doubt. And as submariners were fairly wanted at home, as it were, for full submarine service, they complained to the commandant that they weren't officers, they were senior rates, petty officers. And they shouldn't be in an officers' camp with a lot of filthy officers. They didn't like them. The officers were unkind and looked down on them and all this claptrap. And of course Jerry said, no, of course you shouldn't be here. My goodness me, no, we don't want that. So they left Colditz, of course, with all the information that we could possibly give them, money and what have you. And they went back to Lambsdorff, from which camp they escaped. And the next thing I heard, we were both in Switzerland. And their story is quite amazing. They both ended up as engineer commanders, which I think is tremendous. Mike Harvey, Hugh Bruce, Marine, Darby Curtis, Jack Keats, Trevor Beat, submariner. As I say, who else? Of the 16, I can remember them all their names in a minute.
Well, Crisp was one, was it?
John Crisp, captured in Crete. He was a sort of harbour master in Sudan. There. Jack Keats. I've forgotten. Anyway, as I say, I can remember them.
When you got to Colditz, were there other faces you knew?
No.
And there
None at all, no.
weren't many naval officers?
No, there were 3 there, I think. There was a chap called Stevenson, who was a lieutenant commander, flying chap. He wasn't in the naval camp. John Davis and a fellow called Cheetham. There were only 3 naval officers there that I can recall offhand. So we made the numbers up to 19, and then 2 or 3 came in later. Charles Elwell, Newborough, Mickey Wynne. Oh, 1 or 2 others. No, I didn't know anybody there because they were mostly soldiers from the mostly from the BEF, initial BEF.
A lot were captured at Calais.
A lot were captured at Calais. The 51st Highland Division, who were captured at St Valery. A lot of the Highland people, Bertie Bystad, all those sort of chaps. RAF people who got out of the Stalag Luft 3 and been recaptured. Some of whom you know very well, of course, Peter Tunstall. I had a letter from him the other day. He lives in South Africa.
That's right.
In Neisner, yeah.
When you got to Germany, when you arrived in Germany, was there any time when you were interrogated?
Yes, very much so. Yes, I'd forgotten that. Well, I hadn't forgotten it, but I've got to tell you, yes. First of all, we were put in the civilian side of the camp, which was the merchant service people. They were civil internees. And we were put in there in this very poor conditions. I seem to remember we were in a room where I think there were 16 bunks, 1, 2, 3, and then 6 or 7 that way. So you had to sort of climb up and get in. It was really rather ghastly. And there was a sort of little bit of a strip separating us from the naval section. But as soon as the bars got out that there was another intake of naval prisoners, we were warned about the interrogation methods up at Wilhelmshaven. We I must have spent about 3 or 4 weeks at least in that Melag, Marine Internees lager. We were wheeled off to Wilhelmshaven, where we were in virtually solitary. Quite well, nice sort of rooms, or cabins, if you like to call it that. And I was there for 4 or 5 weeks, I think. And then eventually they came for me one day, and I went into a room where there was a German naval officer, intelligence chap, no doubt. And the first thing he did was offer me a player's cigarette out of one of those lovely round 50 tins. And he said, "Oh yes, we've got plenty of these. We've got a lot at Dunkirk, you know." And I don't know, good. "Oh yes, your naffy left a lot behind." Anyway, there we are. And he seemed to know quite a bit. asked me questions. One had been warned to watch one's tongue, and I hope I did. You know, he said, when did you last see HMS Malaya? So I said, oh, 2 or 3 years ago, you know, sort of thing. He said, oh, wasn't she in Port of Spain, Trinidad? I said, well, I don't know. And he said, oh, well, you came from there, didn't you? I said, oh, did we? Good Lord, I didn't know that, sort of thing. And he said, right, yes, oh, you're no Hoggard. So he got out the Navy list. I said, ah, yes, your seniority is 7th of January 1940 as a sub-lieutenant, I see. I said, where the hell do you get that? They obviously, it was fairly easy to get a Navy list, I suppose. But they had one. I don't think they got anything out of one, but you just don't know. The thing is, of course, that if you want to get information from somebody, you've got to get it on the moment of capture. Now, if they'd had an intelligence officer on board the ship, I mean, for example, they hauled me out of the water like a drowned rat. If they'd sat me on a stool and asked me questions, I'm quite sure one would have said all sorts of terrible things, because you know, there you are, you've been fighting, you've abandoned ship, you've been in the water, and you're in a state of after the war, when I went back into the Navy, after leave and doing my sub-lieutenant's courses, which were been delayed for about 3.5 years, I found myself in a cruiser in the China station. And we were sent up, after we'd refitted in Australia, we were sent up to Japan as the occupier, the British part of the occupation forces. And we went up to Kure, and purely in passing, I went and had a look at Hiroshima. Be that as it may. But then my captain got fed up. We went up to Yokohama, which was in the American zone. Americans didn't really want us. We said to hell with that, and so fortunately we stayed there. I went down to Yokosuka, or Yokosuka, which was Japanese naval base at the bottom of Sagami Bay. As a matter of fact, I went down to scrounge a jeep off the Americans, because we had one in the ship, but it was giving trouble, and I thought we might be able to scrounge one from the Americans. And I took a bottle of whiskey down with me and came back with the jeep. But that's another story. I went round the naval base there and looking at the Japanese fleet that had been caught in a massive air raid there. And there were ships on their side and upside down and everything else. And the chap taking me round said, oh, that's a German ship there, that one, upside down. So I said, oh, what was it called? He said, oh, it's called...
'43, was it? Middle of '43?
What are we talking about? 42?
Or 42?
42? August 42.
August 42.
August 42,
So
yeah.
the camp, as far as the British were concerned, was pretty well set up with the different organisations, you know.
Yes, the initial teething troubles that they had with everybody doing their own thing. They had an escape committee. Dick Howe was he'd just taken over from Pat Reed. He was the sort of coordinating.
Because Pat Reed had gone by then, hadn't he?
Pat Reed had gone. Well, no, not quite, but Pat Reed he left in September, I suppose, of '42. I've rather forgotten about then, with Billy Stevens, who'd come with us from the Marlag.
So he wasn't there very long.
He wasn't there very long. No, he wasn't. He was there about 3 weeks, I think.
Really?
So
and
that got him off.
Did you get involved with the escape side of things, or were you more interested in the other side of things?
Well, I wasn't interested in the other side. What other side of things do you mean?
Well,
no, one. Yes, one did one's bit, stooging. Always one. There was always something to do like that. I conceived the idea of breaking out through the orderlies' staircase, which was, if my memory serves, just by the cookhouse. There was a delousing shed, and then the cookhouse, and in between was a staircase, and I think the orderlies were there. And I conceived an idea of sort of breaking through under there, but
that would have been through the adjoining wall.
well, I thought, yeah, I thought we might get through there, but that, I'm afraid I was wasting my energies. No, the experts were way above me. I mean, all the clever guys of getting through sewers and all this sort of thing.
What about the other side of things, where, for example, all the different courses that were run, people learned to speak different languages?
Well, I was coming on there. I teamed up with a Belgian. There were about 13 when I arrived, about 13 Belgians. And I teamed up with a chap called Freddie de Viver, who was still alive, but not terribly well. He had a frightful accident last year. And thereby hangs a little bit of a tale. Freddie was a cavalry officer, nice, terribly nice chap. He was in the 1st Lancers, I think, which was a fairly senior regiment. And I decided I'd learn a bit more French from him. But I've also found he's quite good German, so we teamed up and I taught him English. He speaks extremely good English today, which I take some pride in. I remember vividly, I said, well, look, in the library there are a lot of English books. You better get hold of some English books and read them, and tomorrow we'll talk about what you've read. And he came down one day and he said, Jean, dites-moi, what is What Ho Old Bean? So I said, what the hell are you talking about, Freddie? He said, oh, here's a book by Mr. Woodhouse, B.G. Woodhouse. And he said, there's a character there called Bertie Wooster, who seems to belong to some club called the Drones Club. And they said, what ho old bean? I said, my dear chap, they're not really colloquial English, but anyway, I would remember that, dear Freddie. Little side story on that. I had, my mother had sent out, we used to get parcels every 3 months, as you probably know, and articles of clothing and chocolate and soap, sort of the things one really wanted. And my mother sent out some thick winter woolly vests, and I had 2 or 3 of these. And Freddie was married with a young child, Eve, who sadly died after the war. And he telling me that he used to be able to write to his wife, and things were pretty rough in Belgium. I said to Freddie, I said, well, look here, I got these woolen things. What about a vest? I know I'm fairly large, and your son is only about 4. But if I gave you a woolly vest to send to your wife, would she be able to do something to, for Eve? So he said, well, yes, indeed. And I think I put in some cigarettes, gave Freddie cigarettes, put in the little parcel which he was allowed to send back. And I'm not sure, there probably few little bits of chocolate or something. And that led, oddly enough, to a lifelong a friendship, really. And after the war, we used to go and stay with them, and they used to come over here. And as I say, Freddie's still alive, and he came to our reunion 2 years ago, and I think 3 or 4 years ago we went and stayed with him. Got a nice little farmhouse just outside Jordan, Wavre, down that part of the world. but 30 miles from Brussels. So that's a sort of that was a friendship which started in pounding round the courtyard in Colditz, and
it seems
and we went out, and his wife Evelyn, and never forgot that. That was, she always, you know, when we were there, she always used to tell her friends, "Oh, this is the chap." I said, "Look, steady, you know." But she made a tremendous impression.
That it seems that friendships made in Colditz stayed pretty much made.
Oh, I think yes. After the war, we all went our different ways. Of course, to earn a living or carry on in the service or do whatever. But I think it's rather trite to say, but you know, we were all locked up there together for a couple of years. And now looking back at those people who left, you know, they're all chums. Mm. Quite extraordinary.
I understand from Jimmy Yule that you learned to play the piano while you were in college.
Oh, I did. I decided that I'd love to play the piano. Well, Freddie played the piano. He sort of started me off, and there was a little cell with a piano in it, which Freddie used to use, and it was brought up to the theatre, of course, I suppose, for concerts. Jimmy Yule used to play the, whatever it was, the saxophone, I think, didn't he?
Don't know.
I think he did, and he used to write sort of music. Yes, I decided that I'd like to learn, you know, what the piano was like, and I possibly a little ambitious. Having discovered that that blob meant that note, really, actually from scratch, and then I went, you know, so I've got working. I said, right, well, I will learn a Mozart sonata, which I did. So I learned Mozart sonata in A major, literally by, what's that? Oh, that must be that one. Oh, it's a black note, that one, you know. And I did it. It took me 2 years, mark you. But I decided I wasn't a musician at all. I didn't have the talent for that, but it was rather fun to.
You didn't follow it up?
No, I didn't, sadly. I did a bit when I came back, but no, I didn't. I didn't really have the talent, sadly.
Were there any, whilst you were in Colditz, were there any incidents that you remember, either good or bad, funny or otherwise, that stick in your mind?
Well, I think most of them one can remember. I remember the incident which, when they tried to relieve the guard, which I'm sure you know all about, it's been documented and everything else. He got shot with a very light caliber pistol. Fortunately, he got shot in the chest by Big Bum, the under officer. I can't remember his name now, but it's in the book. And there was a special appel at about 11 o'clock at night, and of course the usual mayhem and disorderly behaviour and all this sort of thing. And a lot of people in the Saalhaus hadn't turned up. And whoever was I suppose it was Eggers, told the senior British officers, where are these people from the Saalhaus? Go and get them. And David Hunter shouted out, no, let the murdering bastards go and get them themselves. Well, that was heard by Eggers, who immediately put him under arrest for vilifying the Wehrmacht, and he was court-martialed, and he went to Leipzig as court-martial. Black Campbell, I believe, was defending him with a German lawyer, and history sort of relates that the trial was going all right, you know, and a reasonable defence was being put up until there was an air raid. I don't know if you heard this story. No, there was an air raid, and the judge, the presiding officer of the court-martial, said, right, the court will rise, there's an air raid on, the Americans are bombing the city. David then ruined his case by saying, hurrah! Which didn't indeed. So not unnaturally that put the courts back up, and he got 6 months fortress arrest, and he went up to a place in Prussia, East Prussia, called Graudenz, I think. Strange how one remembers some of these names. And he did 6 months fortress arrest there, which wasn't very funny. He was a bit... He was certainly a sadder and wiser man when he came back, let's put it like that, and a bit thinner perhaps. But oh yes, all these things one remembers. The French, you know, the Undertaker, that story about the Undertaker, and then they had a little tank, made a little tank, caught a mouse and put it in one of these roundels, you know, and set it off. Admittedly, Pupka, the German lager officer at the time, I think he smiled actually. Oh yes, all those things one remembers.
What do you remember about the German staff there? I mean, you probably didn't have much to do with any of the commandants.
The commandant? No, I never saw him. Well, one did, I suppose, once or twice. Second in command, I remember vaguely, I can't remember his name now. The one. The German officer, I mean, you know, there was. Pupka, I had quite a lot of respect for him. Day in Colditz when the Russians were bombarding Dresden and the Americans were bombarding Leipzig, and the tanks, American tanks, were just about to open fire and all this sort of lark. I was down in the courtyard, and Pupka was there, and he said, he suggesting we all took cover or something, got down in the cellars or did I've rather forgotten. And by then, I mean, I could talk a bit of German. And I said to him, why don't you shove off? Because, you know, in a few minutes' time, you're going to be a POW or dead. And his attitude was that he was there for however long he'd been on the German staff, 3 or 4 years, I suppose, I don't know. He said no, he was a German officer. He was there to make sure that the prisoners of war didn't get out, but he was there on the administrative staff, and he felt his duty was to stay to see that we came to no harm from any of his own guards who might try and do some mischief or something like that. And that was his attitude. I remember that.
The atmosphere
it was very good.
Must have been rather tense.
Very tense.
Yeah.
Very tense. You see, at the other camps, particularly the naval camp, they were all told to pack up, move east. And they were marched out and they were moved east. And sadly, on their sort of column of march, they were strafed by the RAF, and the captain of one of the tribal class destroyers was killed. Which tribal was it? Oh, I forget now. Bedouin. Captain of Bedouin, they'd been sunk in the Mediterranean, and he'd survived. He was killed. And all these other camps were on the move. And the order came from Dresden, the commanding general there of Wehrkreis 10, which we were, you know, that was the called in selling 10B. No, 4. Sorry, Verkreis 4. 10B was the Marlag. Sorry, 4. That we would have to be moved, and Willie Todd said no, thank you very much, and that got a bit tense, and the commanding general said, you've got to move them, shoot some if you have to, sort of thing. And Willie said, well, be it on your own head, to the commandant, and the commandant said, okay, we stay put. But things were fairly a bit tense then. Yeah.
What do you remember of the actual liberation?
Oh, first of all, some German tanks crossed the bridge over the river, and I mean, quite a lot of people thought they were American tanks, saying, hooray, here come the Americans, but they all had black crosses on them. And the following morning, I think the American tanks appeared. They'd been sent to get us out. As you probably know, they appeared and crossed the bridge and took up a position in a field. And then, to our disgust, they started to get out of their tanks and eat breakfast. we could see them, of course, from the upper stories of the castle. Anyway, eventually they climbed back in their tanks. They opened fire, and as you know the story, they ranged on the castle until a Frenchman hung out a homemade tricolour. Well, that's all history. And they realised that this was the castle that they'd come to relieve. I remember one German chap trying to blow up the bridge. Poor bugger. It was a very pathetic thing. He had a Panzerfaust. I don't know what you call it in English, anti-tank, a sort of anti-tank thing on the end of his rifle. You know, and he fired it at the bridge. He kept on firing 2 or 3 times at the bridge. It made absolutely no effect, and eventually I think he got shot. And then, of course, in walked the Americans. They lobbed bricks over the top of the castle to the Germans who were well behind the castle.
There was a gun position behind them.
Yeah, well, the tanks that had come over, the German tanks that had come over the previous day, I think it would be, or previous day. I don't know where they'd gone. They'd gone over the other side of the hill and got out of it. But the Americans lobbed a few bricks over there just to keep them happy, keep their heads down. And then in they came, and that's that.
And a couple of days later, you're all taken off to an airfield somewhere, weren't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. We were told by the Americans, look, we're going to get you out of here fairly smartly. Don't stray. You can go in the village if you like. Well, I did, and but a lot of the people tried to get the sappers tried to help the village get a bit of water on and electricity and that sort of thing. Well, I wasn't very interested in that. I was more interested in trying to find a chicken, which I did. I went into town. I got hold of a chicken, and there was a pub there, and I went in there and I said, I'd like some wine, please. So they produced a bottle of something or other. Thank you very much. So I went back, and I was very happy. I had a chicken and a bottle of wine. They were passed over without a murmur. And I produced some of this lager money. I said, oh, well, here you are. How much do you want? You know, sort of 5 marks, 5 marks. And they were absolutely, the shopkeepers, absolutely staggered. They thought I'd probably pull a gun out and shoot them if they didn't fork it out. I offered them this lager money. I think I probably put 5 marks down or whatever it was. I was happy. And then I think 2 days later, along came a fleet of 15-tonners or whatever they were. And the British and the Free French, I think I'm right in saying, and some of the Poles that were still there, got into that. We were taken to Weimar. We spent the night there. We climbed into a fleet of Dakotas, took off. We refilled in Lille, I think it was, and then we landed somewhere in Oxford. And the army people were taken off to some army mess. We had an RN charabanc, coach, was there to meet us, and we were driven to London to a sort of staging camp run by a wing commander, and a very elderly wing commander in the RAF, who said, well, you're going to go back to Portsmouth tomorrow and all be arranged and have supper here, but don't go out. Well, I mean, that was bloody stupid. So we went out, we came back, and we caught the 8:50 to Portsmouth and driven to RNB, Royal Naval Barracks, taken to the slop chest, given a suitcase, help yourself. We hadn't got any clothes, of course.
Were you interrogated on the British side then, or
No.
briefed, or?
No.
Because
No.
some of the army.
I think some of the army people were, yes. I don't think the Navy, I don't think they were very interested.
So how long had you been out of England at that time, John?
6 years?
6 years.
6 years. I had 6 years foreign service leave, foreign service leave, survivors leave, POW leave, anything you like. But I came here, back home to Boston. I had a boat then. I remember I said, right, I'm going for a sail. So I put the boat in the water, a wooden boat, 21 foot. Put it in one morning and it took up quite nicely. Following day I went for sail on Chichester Harbour here, which is full of Mulberry Harbour stuff, all the caissons. And then a friend of mine here said he wanted to go over to the Isle of Wight to pick up a little dinghy there. So I said, okay, we'll sail over. Well, we've had to get permission from Commander-in-Chief Portsmouth to sail, to move at all. So I got permission, and I remember vividly going for a sail, sailing out, lovely sail over to Wootton. The only sail there, you know, lovely feeling.
The war would have still been on then?
Oh, absolutely, the European war. Three triple turrets, very modern ship. Refitted in Sydney. Then up to China, Japan, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Nanking. We went up to Nanking. We took Commander-in-Chief up to Nanking to say goodbye to Chiang Kai-shek. And his flag lieutenant was unwell in Hong Kong. So I and a Chinese naval officer, a lieutenant, I remember his name too. Isn't it extraordinary how one can remember names like that? Mei Chi Tung. Lieutenant Mei Chi Tung and I acted as flag lieutenants. So we went off with the Commander-in-Chief, Bruce Fraser, to said goodbye to Chiang Kai-shek at the tomb of Sun Yat-sen in Nanking. And all the knobs signed their names in a book. You know, Lord Fraser of North Cape, blah, blah, blah. And right at the bottom, J. Hoggard.
So you were back in the swing of things?
So, oh yes, indeed, yep.
And you
I had a lovely time. I was senior lieutenant which meant that I didn't really keep many watches. I was at sea. I kept watches with the specialist officers, the lieutenant commanders, which was great. I had a lovely time.
How long did you stay in the Navy, Jim?
Well, when I came home, then we had to have what was known as a pulheim, pulmonary, upper and lower limbs, heart, ears, eyes and mouth. In other words, a full medical. And I'm afraid my right eye was giving trouble. It had got very short-sighted. And as the Navy were delighted to have any excuse of getting rid of anybody, they said, right, off you go. That was that. So I came home and I went up to Lloyd's as first of all the broker, and then as an underwriter. I spent 25 years in Lloyd's, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Age 59, I said, right, I want to come back to Bosom and sail my boat, go beagling. So I retired.
Very good.
Bonk.
Well, that seems to be a lovely place to end, John. Thank you ever so much.
Okay.
We've more or less covered it, and you said you wouldn't get an hour, but you've been an hour and a half. So.